Rejection of light. The message of the everlasting gospel as brought in the light of the Advent truth of 1844 called upon men to obey all the commandments of God, including the seventh-day Sabbath. Truly understood, received, and obeyed, the Sabbath of God is the evidence of the presence of the power of God, and therefore its place in the teaching of the last message of mercy. To the world, it is vital and necessary. It has to be there, or the message is incomplete and lacking in vital power and strength. The Sabbath, however, is particularly objectionable to those who reject the message. They are led to cast aside the whole law in order to avoid the claims of the Sabbath, but the work of the Sabbath reform extends nevertheless, and the more it does, the more it is resisted by the churches. If you are truly a follower of Christ, you will obey the biblical seventh-day Sabbath. In this way, the rejection of the truth of God becomes the more confirmed, and inevitably the power of sin makes the more determined and effective inroads into the world. Thus, the very churches that are in the world as the channels by which the salvation of God is to come to the world become the very means by which sin is strengthened and entrenched. Thus we read, as the work of the Sabbath reform extends, this rejection of the divine law to avoid the claims of the fourth commandments will become well nigh universal. Teaching of religious leaders have opened the door to infidelity, to spiritualism, and to contempt for God's holy law, and upon those leaders rests a fearful responsibility for the iniquity that exists in the Christian world. 2 Timothy 3:1. But know this, that in the last days perilous times will come, for men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasures rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying its power, and from such people turn away. We are in the last days, and this situation exists right now. The common man can see it, the officials can see it, the church can see it, and the leaders of the nations can see it too. Everyone can see it, and it is because they can, and because they are disturbed by it, that it becomes the issue even on political platforms. A human solution. This brings us to the next step in the march to the setting up of the image of the beast. They have rejected the truth of God, the Sabbath of God, the power of God, the barrier to sin removed. It has swept in like a flood. The teachings of religious leaders have opened the door to infidelity, to spiritualism, and to contempt for God's holy law. And upon these leaders rests a fearful responsibility for the iniquity that exists in the Christian world. Yet this very class put forth the claims that the fast-spreading corruption is largely attributable to the desecration of the so-called Christian Sabbath, and that the enforcement of Sunday observance would greatly improve the morals of society. It is a principle of life that the committing of one wrong act opens the door for the next. Thus, when David committed adultery with Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah the Hittite, he had the option of making a clean-cut confession of it, or of committing murder to cover up the first sin. So the churches, having rejected the Sabbath of God and the power of God, add further sin to the first sin by charging the trouble to Sunday desecration when it is not that at all. This is an act in support of Sunday, and therefore it is further act in the rejection of the Sabbath, the truth and the power of God. Should we obey God rather than men? Keeping the true, biblical seventh-day Sabbath is in line with the Bible truth, not the so-called Sunday which man has made. We must make a choice to follow God till the end, or we shall perish.